Today we're going to talk about EDT circuits, which is Escalating Density Training. It was originally developed by Charles Staley and documented in his book Muscle Logic. But when he developed it, it was mainly based around hypertrophy. That's what it was designed for. But the more he started to use it, the more he realised there was much more applications, and if not better applications, for strength and conditioning for athletes. And that's why we use it. We use it for mostly around our GPP phase and deload weeks. The rep ranges, the length of each escalating density circuit and the load is all going to vary depending on where we are and what our goal is, and depending on which energy system we're focusing on in which block. There are a few things that are consistent and that we can boil down escalating density training as. So number one, they're pretty much always two exercises. Or if you're looking at CrossFit terminology, they're pretty much always couplets. The second thing that's always the same, which is probably the standout benefit of escalating density training in terms of why they work across the board for every different adaptation, is we're always using antagonistic pairings. And antagonistic pairings can either be muscle groups or it can be movement patterns. So you could have biceps and triceps, or you could have push and pull movements. And the last thing that's consistent across the board is that there's never any rest. Or again, if you're looking at it from CrossFit terminology, then you would describe it as no matter the time of the circuit, it's pretty much always going to be an AMRAP. Or working back and forth. So no matter the rep ranges or the length of the circuit itself, you'll always be working back and forth across both exercises with no rest throughout the duration of the time limit. So I'm going to give you a pretty typical example now of an EDT circuit. And the rep ranges on this, again, they can change. So I'll give you a few different examples. Aerobically, we maybe work 1 to 1. Lactate, we maybe go 10 to 10. Obviously the percentages are then changed or adapted to suit that rep range. But just the premise is still the same. We maybe set a timer for a certain amount of time, and this is just how it would work. So as you see there, we're just doing 1 and 1, we're just working from bench to pull up, back and forth for the full duration of the EDT circuit. So a few things to consider when you're doing these escalating density training circuits. You obviously don't, especially if the AMRAPs are short, you obviously don't want to have a lot of time between exercises, especially on the 1 to 1 aerobic circuits. So trying to make sure that your equipment is grouped next to each other. If you're doing, some sort of squat and some sort of pull up, you want to make sure that your bar is next to the rig. You want to make sure that if you're doing whatever it is you're doing, you want to try and make sure your exercise, there's not a long distance between walking between exercises. You can do 1 rep, you can turn around, you can get on the piece of next apparatus, and you can do the next exercise. You don't want to have a long distance between equipment because you don't want to lose the intensity and then obviously screw up your scoring if you're looking back to the previous weeks to see how many reps did I get that last week. Okay, this week I want to try and beat that. Or about this week I have to walk 30 seconds between equipment. So try and keep your stuff together. If there's going to be certain things depending on your gym that might make that difficult, on the fitter programming you'll see there'll be different options. So just for example, if there was say Swiss bar bench and trap bar deadlift, now a lot of gyms might not have these types of speciality bars, so you would also just change that for straight bar bench and straight bar deadlift. There's always going to be different alternatives for these exercises, and the same goes for your exercise grouping. So sometimes there will be occasions where it is impossible for you to do two exercises that are close to each other. So if you can find a similar exercise, we will give options, but if you can think of a similar exercise that works the same movement pattern or the same muscle group, but it's going to make sure that you're not having to walk across to the other side of the gym to complete the circuit, then maybe that's the better option, because the aim is to maintain the intensity. Obviously we're working through heart rate zones as well, but the goal is to not be having long breaks, especially in these short EDT circuits.